Opening day is finally here, which means we've got a whole new set of prospects to try to learn. Which ones do we need to add now? Which ones should we be tracking to add later? And which ones can we completely ignore? I've got Matt Morris of Scout the Stat Line on the line to help me answer those questions here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax. Eric Holtzman here, and I am joined today by Matt Morris of Scout the Stat Line, somebody who knows quite a bit about all these prospects up until this point in their major league careers. But it's a pretty exciting day. We're going to get to see a whole bunch of these guys getting a chance in the big leagues for the first time. Matt, you excited for opening day, or do you think it's just another day? Do we need to make a big deal of this one?
Yeah, this is our, in the industry, this is our holiday, right? And this is what we look forward to. And we were kind of talking before we jumped on today. I'm currently in Vegas, but I'm from the Milwaukee suburbs originally. So for us in the Midwest and a lot on the East Coast, this was, sun shining, hoping for eternal, right? We have the opportunity to come into summer and really jump things off with opening day every year as we got through the years. And it still holds a very special place in my heart. And then lastly, kind of now that I've transitioned into deep prospects, dynasty analysis, we get to finally see how these guys hold up, these rookies that entered the league and have their first couple of weeks. And we look at last year, not the greatest for some of our big names, but hoping this year that we have some great returns on these rookies.
Yeah, we will be getting into all of these rookies soon enough. That is the main topic of the day. We're going to try to look at every single rookie. We'll skip the backup catchers and some of the long relievers, but we're going to at least mention as many rookies as we can this year, trying to figure out which ones you should pick up now, which ones you might be picking up later, and which ones I don't think you need anything to do with. But let's start with some of the headlines, beginning with Mookie Betts, who has been dealing with an illness this spring, an illness which has cost him nearly 20 pounds, according to the reports. He missed the Tokyo series, but he is ready to go for the Dodgers opener today. I guess if you still had a draft over this upcoming weekend, how far do we need to move Mookie Betts down? Is the fact that he's playing on opening day, does that mean that some of the worries that were there the last week were maybe a little bit overblown, or are you still pretty worried about this one?
I'm not as worried as maybe I was a week ago. Now that we know that he's playing, the weight loss should have been water and maybe fat loss. There was some reports that the organization was not concerned that it was, loss of muscle mass. I think anytime you lose weight, you have to expect time to rebuild that weight in that body, right? I would imagine maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most for him to start being able to actually hold food, right? Because that was the big issue that we heard. He couldn't hold a meal. Once he starts eating properly, getting into the routine of things, I think middle of April, we have a normal Mookie Betts, but first couple of weeks, I'm not expecting him to come out and hit 4 home runs. I am just being mindful that we're going to have to hold the runs, maybe some of the RBIs, base hits, doubles. Like that should be the expectation for Mookie. The only concern I have is, does this lead to a secondary injury as his body recovers? We'll have to see.
All right, so maybe don't put Mookie Betts in your DFS lineups on opening day, even though he is back in the Dodgers lineup. Somebody else who might be back a little bit sooner than we were thinking a few days ago is Jared Jones, although it's only a maybe here. Let's figure this one out. So Jared Jones is diagnosed with a UCL sprain in his right elbow, but he's not undergoing surgery, just going to be shut down. But he's shut down for 6 weeks. And then when those 6 weeks are up, he's going to have to do basically a full spring buildup, right? So I think the earliest we can reasonably expect to see Jared Jones pitch is late June, possibly even July, and we won't really know until that 6-week shutdown period is up, whether that's even a possibility, right? I don't think we're going to hear anything 2 weeks from now that, while Jared Jones was sitting at home, everything is better or everything got meaningfully worse, right? Nothing's really going to change. So how do you play this one with Jared Jones? Is he off the board or is he back on it, given that he's not undergoing surgery?
For me, he's off the board. This feels very 2024 Kyle Bradish. Similar velocity. The output for Bradish is a little bit easier with the mechanics. For Jones, we see that high intensity, right? That that real gunslinger, and the body types are a little different. So anytime that we have the higher end velocity guys that get shut down and choose not to have Tommy John right out of the gate, it really does concern me. And I say Kyle Bradish because when he came back, he looked absolutely fantastic for the whole 5 minutes we got to watch him. For Jones this year, I'm just concerned. Again, dating it back even a little further than Bradish, we had Gallen, who chose not to have Tommy John when he had the strain in the forearm. That was a very different situation. Not as higher end of the velocity thrower, leaned more on his off-speed changeup. Jones needs that fastball to be effective. And when you already have a strain, the likelihood is with his overall mechanics, it may lead to another injury. So he's off my board.
Yeah, fair enough. I think if you did draft Jones already and you have injured list spots, I mean, use them and hope, but not too optimistic, even though it could have been worse. Elsewhere in the NL Central, we've got news for the Cincinnati Reds. Some positive, some negative. We've got Spencer Steer actually is ready to go for opening day, despite it previously sounding like his shoulder issue was going to send him to the IL to open the year. So that's positive news there. But Austin Hayes will be opening on the IL with a calf injury. I suppose in Cincinnati, it's another year where they have a few too many players who are at least decent, and we've got one positive and one negative here, and the net effect for everybody else, I suppose, is just pretty neutral, right?
Yeah, and the Spencer Steer injury in camp was really concerning because he had an interview where he had basically just come out and said, like, I'm not sure exactly when my shoulder is going to respond. And I've had shoulder surgery. I understand that verbiage very well. You have to allow the shoulder to loosen up and really kind of wake up while you're strength training and then get that full mobility back. So for Steer, I'm very tentative to see what he's going to do in April. I would prefer to keep him on the bench until we can really start to see how that plays out on the field. But we're going to have to be patient. And Austin Hayes, it is disappointing because there was a lot of excitement for him coming into the season. Hopefully he can come back and still provide that value. But a lot of question marks in that outfield in Cincinnati. And, we will have to see who becomes the starters and who provides value.
Yeah, Hayes was projected for the cleanup spot. That was our news just 2 days ago. And less than 24 hours after that, shut down with a calf injury. So tough news for anybody who picked him that brief window based on that bit of news. We've got some more news here. There's going to be a whole bunch of closer conversation over the next couple of days as we see who actually gets the saves around the league. Some of that conversation is going to be wrong because the guy who gets the first save might not be the guy who gets saves number 2, 3, and 4. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Tigers is one of those bullpens where things are a little bit hard to read. There is one fewer member, though, of the high leverage mix in Detroit now. Jason Foley was optioned. Jason Foley, who saved 28 games last year, an unusual closer, not a high strikeout guy, not somebody who was seen as anything close to a lock or even necessarily the favorite to save games in Detroit this year, but still surprised to see him completely out of the mix. Who saves games in Detroit this year? If they are to get a save today, do you want to make a prediction that's going to be wrong, 8 hours from now?
I think Bo Brisky has an opportunity, but I think you said it best. I think this is going to be a closer by committee. I had said coming into spring training that Casey Mize was an option. Casey Mize is now no longer an option, right? We've seen him have a really nice spring in the rotation. I think that's going to stick. So closer by committee until maybe an acquisition can be made. This is a tough situation because I think as it stands today, maybe Detroit and Colorado have the two shakiest closer outlooks, and we all could be wrong about both. But definitely in Detroit, there are 3 or 4 options. I think Bo may get that option today.
All right, so we'll have to see if Brisky gets the save. It's going to be against the Dodgers, so who knows if there's going to be any save opportunities in this first series for the Tigers. But hey, they've got Skubal on the mound, so maybe. Speaking of on the mound, somebody who will not be on the mound is Tanner Bybee. Was scheduled to start on opening day for the Guardians, but I don't think we have to worry too much here. Just a stomach bug. It's going to be Ben Lively getting pulled up to make an unexpected opening day start. So congrats, Ben Lively, opening day starter. I suppose if you're putting in any last-minute DFS lineups, probably want to throw some Royals in there against a Ben Lively who didn't know he was going to start until a few hours ago. Probably no long-term implications, though, here, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. And this is a kind of a fun story to track. At least what we're seeing on social right now is a few Chipotle comments. Last season, he was this was Tanner Bybee was on the Just Baseball show with Stephen Kwan, and And he had mentioned how before every start, he gets Chipotle, right? This is routine. And this is something within pitchers through the game we've seen through decades, right? Guys have routines. They stick to those, especially on their days of start. So Tanner Bybee may have a little bit of food poisoning. I'm not going to put it on any institution, but it is disappointing coming off that contract extension. This was supposed to be his really big day, right? Being in the organization for the next 4 years with that contract extension. And unfortunately, it gets taken away from him from just a misfortunate incident, right?
Well, hopefully he does not get food poisoning every 5 days for the next, 5 or 6 years, and his contract will still end up okay. Let's move on to the main topic of today's show, and that is the rookies who made the rosters. We're going to take a look, if we got time, at every single roster and all the rookies who've made the team. We're going to figure out, should you add them right away? Should you track them and possibly add them later, or should you forget them entirely? We're going to start in the AL East, where Baltimore, shockingly, doesn't really have any normal rookies on the roster. Kobe Mayo could have made the team. He didn't. Jackson Holliday, no longer a rookie, although he's certainly not a proven, everyday star yet that he's going to hopefully be one day. The only actual rookie, I think, on the Baltimore Orioles is Tomoyuki Sagano. And I'm guessing you haven't been tracking him for a decade like you have with most prospects that we're going to talk about today. But for the sake of completeness, should we add Tomoyuki Sagano, track him, or forget him?
Yeah, for Sagano, I'm in 15-team standard redraft. I am actually adding or have drafted as one of my last pitchers. I think there's a really safe floor here. I think we're going to be lacking the strikeout upside that we really look for. But on those last few pitchers in redraft, you really want to either balance out some of the risks you've taken or shoot for the ceiling. Sagano for me was a guy that I was actually be playing safe. If I had drafted a Garrett Cole or I had drafted a Jared Jones, he's a guy I'm happy to pick up because I know he'll give me innings and he should protect my ratios. Worst case scenario, I can drop him in a month, 2 weeks, and pick up someone with higher upside.
Yeah, fair enough. So Tomoyuki Sagano, a 35-year-old with no MLB experience and no real bat missing ability, still probably actually has enough about him to help you out in deeper leagues. Not very exciting, though, that's for sure. But there might be a lot more exciting options on the Red Sox. We're not going to see Rowan Anthony on opening day, but we are going to see Christian Campbell, one of the top prospects in all of baseball. Didn't actually have the smoothest of springs, and the Red Sox are deciding he's on the team anyway. I'm assuming we should probably read something into that. Just how good is Christian Campbell? He's already, of course, been drafted in all your deeper leagues, but is he somebody that people in shallower leagues should be rushing out to add right away before he, has a good first series and is gone every single league?
I think absolutely. And it's hard. You have to be mindful when you're rostering these prospects not to batch and bunch them. I always like to say pick one or two that you're willing to sit on for a few months because of what we saw from Jackson Chourio last year, excuse me. It was a terrible start. And then he provides you incredible upside. Lock him. Don't worry about, switching him in and out. He is a starter for you come July through September. And I think Christian Campbell will facilitate that same role. When does he actually click? I think it will be sooner than Chourio did. There's a big age difference. There was a big ability jump for Campbell last year coming out of the fourth round pick for the Boston Red Sox. So we don't have a track record of this great success, but last year was such a dominant year and he excelled at every single level that I think it's just a matter of him getting comfortable, him locking in with the Red Sox. And I do think they're going to give him an extended period of time because, as you said, they trust him enough after a very, very bad spring to still make the club. That to me says a lot. And this overall profile is something that you're just not going to find in the waiver wire midseason. I say pick him up, sit on him, be patient, find other players on your team to make cuts when those cuts are needed. But Campbell's got to be a guy that you are relying on midseason.
And so what sort of player is Campbell going to be at his peak? We're talking 30-30 with a good batting average. I mean, this is a do-everything kind of guy, and we're hoping for 2020 260 this year. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think 260 would be really solid. 2020, kind of in that Matt Shaw profile, which I do think is possible. I think we have to be realistic, though, after a bad spring. I'm hoping for 15-20. I want to see the power to all fields really excel in Boston, and I think that's going to take a little bit of time. But 2020 is not out of the question. I just want to be a little bit careful with throwing that out there because, again, I expect some struggle from him out of the gate. But after he excels, I could even see, a month or 2 month stretch of him going 280 to 290 and really putting up high runs in that lineup, driving in runs as well. The power is the only one that I'm like, we need to just kind of see what we have first, because the translation from AA, AAA to the majors, it is so big. We've seen that over the years. Campbell can do everything, but the power may be the last thing at the major league level.
All right, so we like Christian Campbell. Keep an eye on the downside for sure. The Red Sox do have a deep team. They don't need to use Christian Campbell if he gets off to a poor April, but got to go get him even in those shallower leagues because of the upside that could be here. There's another Red Sox rookie, though. Richard Fitts is set to open the year in the rotation. Now, he is not somebody who is necessarily being talked about too much at the start of camp, but we've got injuries to Brian Bayo, Cutter Crawford, Lucas Giolito. There's plenty of opportunities early in the season for Fitts. Is he somebody to add now just as a streamer? Is he somebody to add now, somebody that you're hoping is going to actually stick around all year, or is he not quite that good?
I think it depends. If you lost Garrett Cole, Jared Jones, if your depth is lacking and you want to go for upside, I think Fitts could be an okay strikeout lean right now. But I am watching him, and I'm only watching him until some of these names come back. I think Fitts will have, mixed value this season at certain times as injuries arise, but I'm not currently adding him in all leagues.
All right, fair enough. So more of a track for Richard Fitts. Let's move to the Yankees, where they have a big name rookie. Jason Dominguez is still rookie eligible. I'm assuming this is correct. He was when I put together this list. Feels like he's been on the verge for quite some time. Obviously, injuries delaying him there. Somebody who actually debuted back in 2013, but could win Rookie of the Year this year. I wouldn't be the first Yankee. Of course, Luis Gil, didn't he debut like 3 years before he won the Rookie of the Year last year? So maybe we'll see that again. I mean, that's the kind of upside we're talking about with Jason Dominguez, right? This is a Rookie of the Year upside. This is future All-Star upside, right? And I assume that means he's already added basically even in all the shallower leagues. No chance. Go get him if he's at all available.
Yeah, he should be rostered across the board, right? I think especially in 5 outfielder leagues, Dominguez is a guy that maybe is your second or your third outfielder just because of that upside we're looking for. The power will be there. We've seen that at Yankee Stadium in his 2 big league appearances in 23 and 24 before the injuries. And I think kind of like Christian Campbell, there are still question marks. What's the batting average going to look like? Is the speed still going to play? Those are my 2 questions for Dominguez. I think we're going to still get 20 stolen bases out of him. My question is the average. I do think the average from maybe June or July through the end of the season will be better as things warm up, as he gets more comfortable. And, the big question is, how is the overall lineup going to look after the loss of Juan Soto? I don't have as many concerns maybe as others in the industry. I think they've made some good additions that will help kind of feel that loss of Soto. But Dominguez overall should be a guy that you are leaning on. I would even say in 3 outfielder leagues, I'm comfortable starting Jason Dominguez.
All right, so Jason Dominguez, a true all formats player, tons of upside there, but he's not the only rookie who will be opening the year in the Yankees active roster. Will Warren is going to be in the Yankees rotation. Now, Warren is someone who also was probably on the outside looking in at the start of camp, but then we've got multiple injuries to the Yankees, 3 of them. Luis Gil, Garrett Cole, Clark Schmidt as well. And actually, there was a lot of talk about Warren entering the rotation after the first 1 or 2, but then it looked like Carlos Carrasco was maybe going to get the job ahead of him until Clark Schmidt got hurt as well, which maybe means that Warren's grip isn't as firm as fantasy drafters wanted it to be. So what's your assessment of Will Warren? Is he somebody you should run out and add, or somebody you should track through his first couple starts?
I'm tracking. Much like Fitz here, there's a lot of variables on the table that could take value away from Warren. There have been some control issues in Warren's minor league career. His overall arsenal is okay, but it's not plus. I think we are going to see decent strikeout ratios with Warren. But again, in environment-wise, he's playing in Yankee Stadium in a very, very good division. I could see Warren at a 4.5 ERA this season. Could see him sitting around a 4, but That's a guy that I'm more than likely going to stream week to week based off matchups. And I need to see a couple starts from him before I have that confidence to pick up and start in my rotation.
All right. So Warren, useful probably for some teams at some point this year, but not nearly as much of a priority as some of the guys we've talked about. Should we move on to the Rays, who have a couple of rookie relievers? I believe is the only real rookies here because Junior Caminero has exhausted his rookie eligibility. Obviously, a superstar young talent there, but the actual rookies on the Rays, Mason Montgomery and is Hunter Biggie, right? Is that the pronunciation? Bigge, Hunter Biggie. Are either of these guys worth even tracking? I imagine we're not rushing out to add a reliever who's not currently closing, but the Rays, they like to spread their saves around. Are Montgomery and Biggie big enough talents that we should track, or can fantasy players more or less forget them for now?
This is deep league, and I like these names. A dynasty analyst like myself, it's exciting to see Montgomery sitting 97 to 99 in spring training as a relief pitcher. Biggie, same thing, big time velocity. Like, you have plus strikeout potential here, but even in 15-man redrafts, you said it, the Rays spread out their saves. You cannot waste a roster spot on Montgomery or Biggie when guys like Warren and Fitz are providing you value in some facet right now. So keep an eye on it. If one of them ends up dominating for the first month, maybe you can look at, hey, that's the guy to take over if Fairbanks has issues. But I just think it's a wasted roster spot currently. So I'm watching them in regards to what they're doing, but the likelihood of adding is unlikely.
All right. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe we'll relearn these names and how to pronounce them in a few months, but no need for now. Finishing up the AL East, we've got a pair of rookies in the opening day lineup for the Toronto Blue Jays. We've got Will Wagner, son of Billy, right? He is the opening day DH for the Blue Jays. And then we've got Alan Roden, son of, I'm not really sure his dad's name. He is batting ninth and starting in right field. Both of these guys, not major prospects, but both Will Wagner and Alan Roden have got real attention, I think, at some points. So these are some of the names that I'm most curious which category you're putting them in here. Both Roden and Wagner. Is either of them an add now, or are they both track at best?
It's hard. Roden's gotten a lot of industry hype over the last couple of weeks. He's been kind of an industry darling. I'm watching both. Now, I think Roden provides the most value, again, in 5 outfielder leagues when you're thinking of, who do we roster here? I'm not adding him today, though. The problem with Roden is if you don't add him today, in a week, if your waiver wire runs on Sunday, he may be gone. So you really have to look at your team overall, your league context, and say, do I have a 6th outfielder? Do I not even have a 5th outfielder? Because if that's the case, absolutely pick him up. The Blue Jays have told us they are in and they want him to have this job. If you have the depth, I would allow him to slide to another team. There'll always be another outfielder coming up. Roden has the opportunity, though. 260, 270. He could give us 15-15. This could be a better lineup than we've expected. Bo Bichette had a really nice spring. Vlad's motivated in a contract year. Wagner, on the other hand, I think there are just other options we can lean on. Roden's the interesting name for me. He's a heavy watch.
All right, we've got a comment here that the Jays are going to get stomped all year long. There's definitely some Jays pessimism from Jays fans, like we've got one here. And that's probably fair, but that probably actually doesn't hurt Alan Roden, right? If the Blue Jays are not competitive this year, guys like Roden and Wagner, they've got a lower bar for how good they need to be to remain in the lineup on a regular basis. So I think that might be true, but I think that actually might, if anything, be a boost. I mean, obviously, we'd love for Roden to play every day, leading off in front of a great lineup, and that would help his run and RBI totals. But I think we'll take what we can get with a player like him at this point.
Yeah, and the big thing is George Springer's contract. I always think about the dollars and cents within Major League Baseball. He's clearly declined. I still saw him being taken aggressively in some redraft this season, which surprised me. The question for me is, will the Blue Jays just kind of eat that money and allow Springer to become more of a bench platoon bat? Maybe Roden has the strong side platoon there. I need to see how that plays out before I go out and use a roster spot. But again, if I'm in a league where my 5th outfielder is already questionable, Roden's a guy that I'm happy picking up today, putting in that role and kind of seeing how it plays out. And that's just, again, because Springer has been abysmal.
All right, so we move on to the AL Central, where we're going to start with the White Sox, who have fewer than 26 rookies. You might be surprised to learn. I've got at least 4 on the list here. I think we're going to take them one at a time, at least to start here, starting with Sean Burke, the White Sox opening day starter. Now, if somebody's good enough to start on opening day, they have to be an ad everywhere, right? Even if they're a White Sox, how good is Sean Burke?
Sean Burke's an ad for me. And this one is kind of the opposite of Seguno, right? I'm looking at all upside for Burke. We know the wins probably aren't going to be there. Has good strikeout potential, has had command issues in the minor leagues. But when you're talking about upside plays, if you put Burke on any other team, I think we're really, really, really excited for him. The problem is he's a Chicago White Sox. So if we can get a 3.5 to 3.75 ERA with a plus strikeout per inning, like we're talking about a good return here. And this could be a player that's ready to make a big leap forward. I'm not going to go out and say he's Garrett Crochet. That's ridiculous. But he could be given the leash that Garrett Crochet was last year in Chicago, where he's allowed to develop at the major league level even more so. And I think out of all the players on the White Sox, Burke next to Robert is probably the only 2 players I'm looking to roster.
Okay, so I thought that we were going to have 4 White Sox. I think it's actually only 3. Brian Ramos is opening the year on the IL with elbow issues. So while we do want Sean Burke, there's 2 other pitchers here who I'm guessing might not even rise into the track/watch list category. Shane Smith, a Rule 5 pick, who is going to be in the rotation for the White Sox. So I guess maybe in super deep leagues, maybe we want Shane Smith. And then Mike Vassell, who was selected actually by the Phillies in the Rule 5 draft, then traded to the Rays and then waived and then claimed by the White Sox. So 2 Rule 5 picks here. White Sox are incentivized to keep both Shane Smith and Mike Vassell on the roster all season long. Are we incentivized to keep them on our roster at all, or even keep them in our brains?
Shane Smith is interesting, coming, as you had mentioned, as a Rule 5 pick from the Milwaukee organization. We now know Milwaukee's pitching development is getting to the elite point, right? They're taking players that traditionally didn't have a place in pro baseball, and they're finding real value and really helping those spin rates. So Smith is interesting more from just a baseball fan perspective. Watch, again, being a White Sox player, I don't know how much value there's going to be this year. He could surprise. Definitely not an ad for me. And then Mike Vassell was very interesting with Tampa, kind of in those names that we mentioned earlier, and kind of held some of the value of those names back because it was kind of a 3-man race for who's going to provide that value. I do think Mike Vassell could be closing games in Chicago midseason, end of season. The problem is it's just not going to be enough to hold that roster spot. So for both of those players I'm watching, but more from just a fan perspective, I don't think fantasy relevant in 2025.
All right. Well, I'm glad I had you on because I would have definitely left both of those guys as forget completely. So maybe at least keep Shane Smith and Mike Vassell in mind in deeper leagues. Moving on to the Guardians, who have some young talents like, say, Jhonkensy Noel and Kyle Manzardo and some young pitchers who are no longer technically rookies. I believe the only rookie I'm seeing on this opening day roster is Joey Cantillo, who has failed to earn a rotation spot. So I imagine that means definitely not an ad, but Joey Cantillo at least a track for when he presumably finds his way into the rotation before too long.
It's interesting. Cantillo's been a guy I've watched for the last couple of years. There have been a number of pieces and variables within his game that we've wanted to see progress, and he just hasn't been able to do so. He's had issues with control. Velocity's been up, it's been down. He's been trying to find his game, and as a lefty, I always say I like to target lefties 26, 27 age range, because it seems for whatever reason, that's when they finally start to lock in. That's my philosophy. So in an odd way, Cantillo this year is not even a watch for me. He's a forget him, because there's a lot of other talent out there that I think has just as much, if not more upside, and has shown a little bit more consistency. Cantillo not making this rotation, which has been riddled by injuries and financial constraint, says a lot to me. I think we might have a small stretch, maybe a month where Cantillo is usable, 3.5 ERA, but I think the inconsistency this year will ultimately land him on waiver wires almost across the industry.
All right, so Joey Cantillo, don't buy the hype, whatever hype is left with him. Let's move to Detroit, where I would imagine we're buying the hype on one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, Jackson Jobe. He has made the opening day roster. He has made the opening day rotation. So he's probably added in medium and deep leagues, but is Jackson Jobe an all formats type of pitcher?
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard to say that because a couple of weeks ago I was on with Pierre and we were actually talking about former prep arms that were taken in the draft and what they actually did in their first year. We haven't seen a prep arm come into the league and absolutely dominate in almost 7 years. I think Job could be the first one in this classification that I just mentioned who provides real value. But I think we need to temper expectations a little bit. I think a 3.5 to a 4 ERA is still very likely. I think it helps that he'll be in Detroit. He needs to find a way to put away batters with the strikeout. He has the arsenal. We've seen it through the minor leagues. We've seen incredible control in the lower minors from Job. That kind of squeaked away from him as he rose up. There's not as many question marks on the ability as more as the development. Is the development done? I do not think so. That development should continue throughout the season. So I think we see a better version of Job in the second half. But the problem is if you don't roster him now, he's not going to be there in the second half. So roster him, be patient with him, watch your matchups. Remember, early in the season, Detroit is cold. Cleveland is cold. In that division, he's going to have weather on his side. So he should start to develop that strikeout, but hopefully limit the ERA early in the year.
Yeah, Job's a tricky one because the numbers don't quite back up what the talent is supposed to be. He has not dominated. If you were to look at all the stat lines of, the top 10 to 15 pitching prospects, you wouldn't necessarily pick out his as the one that's getting everybody excited. But, the scouts really like what he can do. He's continuing to evolve, like you say. So reason to still like Jackson Jobe, certainly, even if we don't know exactly what he's going to be this year. How about the other Tigers rookie on the opening day roster, Trey Sweeney? Looks like he will be the primary shortstop for the team. We saw him for 36 games last year. Didn't go very well, 642 OPS. Is Sweeney even a track here, or is he just not much of a fantasy appeal kind of guy?
It's hard because anytime you have a guy starting at a key position on opening day, ball club's giving him the nod, you have to think to yourself, well, clearly he's a track, right? I don't think so. Again, unless you are severely lacking at your middle infield position, you don't have depth, maybe then he's a track. But I think there are a lot of names that you're able to slide into that middle infield position or even a shortstop position. Heaven forbid you need to start Sweeney at shortstop. That can kind of facilitate that upside and that floor. Sweeney is a guy that probably is a better real life baseball player than he is for us in fantasy in 2025.
I think that sounds about right to me. And I think we're actually almost done the AL Central here because the Royals, they don't have any rookies. Jack Caglianone eventually is going to be a factor here, but he's not here yet. The Royals, I guess they've arrived the last couple of years. The Twins, they have a couple rookies, but I have barely heard of both of these guys, and they're 27, 28, maybe even 29. Deshaun Kiersey and Mickey Gasper have won opening day bench jobs with the Twins. Should I already forget them?
Yes, absolutely. Great names, baseball names. But from a fantasy perspective, I think it's very safe for us to say forget them.
All right, fair enough. We're going to move on to the AL West and the National League right after these messages from our sponsors, starting with Fantrax, which is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming for another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring systems, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. We're also brought to you by the NFBC RotoWire Online Championship, which is live. Play fantasy baseball against your favorite RotoWire experts on NFBC this baseball season. Jeff Erickson, James Anderson, Clay Link, and more, like me, will compete in the RotoWire NFBC Online Championship for a shot at $150,000. Sign up for draft today at rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. Welcome back to the Thursday opening day edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Eric Halterman here with Matt Morris of Scout the Stat Line. And we've been looking at every opening day roster, trying to figure out which of the rookies we should add now, which ones we should track and maybe add later, and which ones we have already forgotten about, including a pair of twins who dutifully I have already forgotten their names. Let's move on to the AL West here, where we'll start with the Athletics. Got a couple of infielders, Jacob Wilson, who we already saw last year, and Max Muncy, the other one. These two infielders for the Athletics, which of them are worth adding now, which are worth tracking, and if any, which should we forget?
I'm adding Wilson, and Wilson's profile is not something traditionally that I've liked in fantasy. High contact, low power. The thing is, this year the Athletics, and this isn't across the industry, we're really excited about them, and I don't think the industry is wrong. I think playing in Sacramento, I do think the environment is played up a little bit. Yes, it's a PCL ballpark. Traditionally speaking, PCL parks in AAA have, incredible numbers, but Sacramento's altitude isn't the same as Reno and some of the other Las Vegas's ballpark here, where the ball just flies out if you swat it. But Wilson did show a little bit more power this spring. The exit velocities don't necessarily translate yet, but he is leaning into that pull side power. And I think with the emergence of this lineup in Sacramento for the Athletics, we could see some really good numbers for Wilson outside of just the average. And that excites me. Really targeting him for that middle infield position. Not going to have the speed that you may look for. So think about that in your builds. But if Wilson's on the wire, he's absolutely worth a bench spot here. Muncy, I would like to say forget him, but I do think there is some watch here. There is potentially 15 upside. Then, got the major league name. That's always a plus and kind of fun. But as of right now, I'm not adding Muncy. If we can see this lineup get off to the start that I think they can, there may be value if you incur injuries or have a lack of depth. But right now, Wilson is my target.
Well, I like that you're into Wilson. We'll be publishing the RotoWire staff award predictions later today, and I threw out Wilson for Rookie of the Year. I don't know if he's going to do that with not enough pop, but he could hit 300. He could play every day. I mean, he's got an incredible contact ability, striking out regularly single digits in the minors, struck out 9.7% of the time as a rookie. This spring, Jacob Wilson striking out 3.8% of the time, and he has 4 homers. That's weird. Jacob Wilson doesn't really have any power at all. So I'm really intrigued by what he's done this spring. I would definitely look to get him on some teams. I wish that I was turned on to him earlier in the spring and had already added him. But let's move to the next team here, the Astros, where they've got one of the big stories of the spring. Cam Smith, acquired in the Kyle Tucker trade, just drafted last year. He's played, 32 professional games, I believe it is, and he is going to be debuting on opening day. Cam Smith, superstar? Is that what we're supposed to assume, given that he's up this fast? Or in, at least a medium depth league, because in the deep leagues, somebody's already on him. But in those shallow to medium leagues, is this enough of a star potential that we should be on Cam Smith right away? Or do you think this is a trap?
I think he's a must add. And I hate that because from an evaluation perspective, we do not have enough data for me to really know what he is. But again, when the organization is giving you the nod, it could be simply that they're trying to reward the fan base and make them forget that they traded one of the best outfielders in the game. And hey, we're filling a role where our outfield is horrendous. So let's just move forward with this young kid who is showing some promise. That's a variable on the table that I think some of us are overlooking. But I do think with the spring we saw, some of the numbers in the lower minors for the Cubs last season, there is a lot to be excited here. The question is it 2025? Is this the season that we see a good version of Cam Smith? We could see a great version of Cam Smith. We could also see him come out of the gate and really, really struggle against big league pitching because he has not seen enough volume in the upper minors. And at Florida State, his best season was his last season. Like his development has kind of just started to come on. But because of that being said too, he could explode. I think it's really hard. The last name we mentioned, Jacob Wilson, and then you have Cam Smith. I think they're both equally rosterable. I'm more comfortable with Wilson this season, but I do think Cam Smith could provide immense value. And then lastly, if you get that dual eligibility of third base eligible and outfield eligible, that's a big piece for a lineup. You can really move him around. So I'm adding Cam Smith. I am buying into the hype. More of a dynasty ad here for me long term. I think we could have a superstar in our hands, but 2025, that eligibility is really important, and I'm adding him.
Yeah, all right. Good to hear. We've got a Jordan Walker comparison in the chat here.
Love that.
Uncle Ted pointing out that Cam Smith, I don't know if this stat is accurate or slightly exaggerated, but that he faced high A and double A starters for 97% of his at-bats. I don't know if that's literally true this spring, but that kind of thing in general is a factor we do see where somebody has an outstanding spring, and then you'll look into the game log and wait a second, he hit that homer off who? And he hit that one off who? So certainly there's the chance that Cam Smith, I mean, he could be back in the minors in April, right? That's the floor we're talking about here, but the potential is so high and the way they're talking about him is so encouraging that we do have to go get him now if you want to get him at all. The Astros have another rookie, though, who could enter the mix, maybe if Cam Smith struggles and is sent back down. Zach DeZenzo has made the team's opening day roster. Is he, I'd imagine, not an ad because I don't see playing time right away, but is he at least a track?
He's a track, but everything this offseason kind of changed his projection. He was a guy that we've been excited about because of opportunity potential, but bringing Christian Walker, having the trade that brought in Paredes, it kind of sucked the biggest positions for DeZenzo out, right? Being a corner guy, potentially DH, those opportunities may be gone. And now having Cam Smith come up and, kind of be announced as their guy that they're going to go with, it's a watch for me with Zach. And, I do think there's power potential there, but probably a 250 hitter at the major leagues. A guy that could 27, 28 as his career continues could turn into a guy very similar to Christian Walker, but the Astros are clearly still going for it. And I think DeZenzo is the guy that ends up back at AAA before Smith does ultimately.
All right, let's move on to the Angels, who tend to call up some guys before we expect, but there's no Christian Moore on the opening day roster. There are a couple names. We've got Kyron Paris has made at least the bench. Is there anything here with Kyron Paris? In one of my out-of-the-park baseball saves, I think he stole 100 bases once, but that was not real life. Is real-life Kyron Paris a player who has any sort of fantasy future?
I'm going to say, at least in 2025, no. The release of Mickey Moniak kind of, for me, says it all. Mickey Moniak's been a guy that's kind of floated on the waiver wires, has had hot streaks. But if you're going to release Mickey and give Paris the opportunity, I think you kind of leaned into it. He may just be that bench speed option that they will lean on. And I need to see a lot more. So for me, he's not necessarily a watch even. We'll have to see how the first month of the season goes. But if there's some injuries, I mean, maybe you add him to your watch list. For me, no, though.
All right. And there's another Angels rookie here. And I don't know what you will have to say on this guy, being that you are with Scout the Stat Line. And for Ryan Johnson, there is no stat line. Ryan Johnson was drafted last year, did not pitch after the draft, and now he's on the opening day roster in the bullpen for now. Who is Ryan Johnson? Do we need to care for fantasy purposes, or do we say cool story and then immediately forget about him?
Yeah, cool story. Also interesting, right? As you said, didn't pitch after taking Dallas Baptist. Big body 6'6". There's a lot to like and dream on with the development here, but in the bullpen on a team that's not going to win 90 games, right? They'll be lucky to win 80. I have zero interest. This is a dynasty story, though, and I'm very curious to see what happens with Johnson, because when a guy doesn't pitch coming out of the draft, especially a collegiate arm, it's one of two things, in my opinion. Either his innings have been capped out in college that year, or he comes in and they may have identified something that they have to say, we're going to shut you down for now. So I'm watching Johnson because I want to follow that narrative and follow that story as we continue to develop and understand how these draft prospects are going. I wouldn't be surprised to see Johnson in the rotation if he can stay healthy. In that case, he would be a watch. But as it currently stands, there's really no fantasy utility in 2025 for Johnson.
All right, I think that sounds fair, but an interesting story for sure. Jack Kukanowicz, who's mentioned here, I believe is no longer a rookie, so we have to skip him, which is probably for the best, given that he has a 9% strikeout rate. The Mariners, I'm not sure they have any actual rookies as well. I couldn't figure out whether or not Ryan Bliss has technically exhausted his eligibility or not, but real quick, do you have any thoughts on Ryan Bliss, just in case he technically does still count as a rookie. I think he may have surpassed the service time thresholds, but not the at-bat thresholds.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that because he has had a number of days within major league organizations, right? And just hasn't been good enough to see the field. Bliss supposedly this offseason has made some adjustments. There's some things to get excited about in deep dynasty leagues that, maybe he'll return some kind of value. But in redraft leagues, there's just nothing here, right? We know environmentally, Seattle has sucked a lot of that power and those counting stats away from players when playing in Seattle. So I'm just going to let 2025 Ryan Bliss hit the wire. And if someone wants to pick him up and extract some of that value, good for them. I'm hoping for it for Ryan Bliss's case.
Wrapping up the American League here, we've got a handful of rookies on the Rangers. There's two big ones in the rotation, and they're both in the rotation right away due to injuries to other pitchers. And, given the injury-prone nature of the rest of the Rangers rotation, maybe both of these guys will stick there all year. Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker. How would you prioritize those in leagues where both are still available? Who is the bigger ad? I'm assuming both of them are at least at minimum a track and probably both ads in most places.
This is a very hard one because Rocker for me is one and pretty significantly one. But with Jack Leiter's added velocity, his strikeout appeal, he's climbing closer to Rocker than I assumed he would by opening day. The problem is Leiter's control has been pretty bad this spring. And another piece that really concerns me is we saw Rocker dominate with velo and stuff at Vanderbilt. We saw Leiter dominate at Vanderbilt, but it wasn't necessarily the velocity. So we see this jump in velocity in his minor league career. There's dedicated stories to him being sent down for player development, working on his mechanics, has the lineage within his family bloodline. So a lot to like there, but overall build and velocity jumps concern me when it comes to potential injury. And Kumar coming back from the injury, I feel safer that we'll get a full 2025 from Rocker than we may from Leiter. And I think with Leiter's control issues, it may end up pushing him into the bullpen. So Rocker 1, Leiter 2, both absolutely worth rostering because of the upside. Just have to keep an eye on exactly what's going on with Leiter and his starts and his walks.
All right, so go get Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter, wherever they're still available in that order. Should we mention Mark Church here, an interesting reliever who I might not mention on other teams, but the Rangers, they're talking about Luke Jackson as the closer. I think that's a closer spot that is wide open. Is Mark Church, is he an ad now, or is he at least a track to maybe take that job later in the year, or not quite this season?
I think he's a track, but the Rangers have a number of tracks. Santos, Talledo, guys that have been starters that could absolutely ascend to a bullpen role and a dominant role. Church is kind of the forgotten about name. He's been in the organization for a number of years now, has shown the ability to put away batters, has shown leverage position within bullpens. I think there is a good chance that Church could have the opportunity at some point this year, but he's also faltered towards the end of spring. So that concerns me. Excited to see him make the roster because, I didn't expect that at the end of spring. And again, you said it, this bullpen, kind of like Detroit, kind of like Colorado, in a little bit of dismay, but there is higher upside players in this organization and they should win games. You said it. We'll see if the rotation can stay healthy. If it can, this should be a very competitive team in which some have picked to go to the World Series. I want to be targeting whoever is closing for the Rangers if that's the case. So keep an eye on Church. I would imagine if he takes the role, it's probably midsummer, but sometimes we just never know.
All right, let's move over to the National League, where I think we'll go a little bit faster because a good number of the teams haven't actually called up any rookies on the opening day roster in the NL. But Atlanta has a couple. We've got Drake Baldwin, who's going to be the opening day catcher, filling in for Sean Murphy. Now, in your 15-team two-catcher leagues, he's definitely on a roster already. In your 12-team one-catcher leagues, I imagine he doesn't quite get there, but should we be at least tracking Drake Baldwin in those one-catcher leagues? And should we be adding him in, say, a 10-team two-catcher league, something like that? What sort of catcher is Drake Baldwin this season?
Yeah, it's interesting because in a number of 12s and in 15s, what I did this year, if I had the ability to draft after the news of Francisco Alvarez or even Sean Murphy, I was drafting both of them and then pairing them with a Baldwin to come out of the gate. Baldwin's numbers in the minor league really show us that this could be a star player. 92-mile-an-hour exit velocity, impacts the ball very hard. The big thing with Baldwin is the launch angle. We want to see that climb up closer to 10, 11, 12, so he can really leverage that exit velocity into major league power. And the secondary question of this is that jump from AAA to the major leagues. We're seeing a significant amount of talent in regards to pitching that they're facing. So does that 92 miles an hour drop down to 88, 89, like we've seen from so many of these other prospects where they just can't impact the ball the same? That's what I'm tracking early in the season. But there is potential for big return here. I really like Baldwin. We'll see what happens. I think when, again, in regards to if you've paired him with an injured catcher, you're in a better place because you can ultimately play the waiver wire. If Baldwin's bad for a week, you drop him. You pick somebody else up and you just wait for Murphy, you wait for Alvarez. But absolutely an ad if you can. If not, keep an eye on him. And also, if he gets dropped, there is opportunity that Sean Murphy has another injury here. He just has not stayed healthy over the last couple of years, and the Braves are contending. They need that bat in the lineup.
That's a good point. Speaking of the contending Braves, that means that there should be a decent amount of wins for whoever gets starts in that rotation. And we're going to see another rookie occupying the 5th spot to start the year, AJ Smith-Shawver, who actually made his debut 2 years ago, made 6 appearances that year, just 1 last year. Hasn't quite made good on the promise yet, and he might only have a couple starts before Spencer Strider returns from the IL, but I'm pretty sure if Smith-Shawver hits the ground running and outperforms Grant Holmes, they would probably stick with him, even though everybody in the fantasy world loves Grant Holmes right now. So what do you see as Smith-Shawver's outlook this season? Is he somebody who needs to be added now, or is this more of a track?
I think if you don't add him now, the opportunity may dry up. This is a really hard one to evaluate because Shawver has not shown us at the major league level consistency, but he's also been very young. He was aggressively pushed through the minor leagues. It's well documented, and we don't necessarily know again that his development is done. I think we're going to continue to see him take strides at the major league level. The question, as you kind of brought up, is does he have a rotational spot? And the big thing for me is the trade of Ian Anderson to the Angels says a lot about the confidence the Braves have in Shawver this season. Anderson could have been a really nice depth piece. Maybe not a guy that we're leaning on in fantasy in 2025, but from a real life baseball perspective, he's been proven in the major leagues coming back from Tommy John. That's a great depth piece. They traded him. So my belief is the Braves believe Shawver can at least be that depth piece throughout 2025, where even if he's taken out of the rotation, they're happy to put him back in. And for me, again, if my rotation may be thin or I've had some injuries, I'm willing to take the upside on Shawver, again, with a team that should potentially compete for a division title and again, needs wins. So a lot to like there for Shawver in value.
All right, love to hear it. Let's move on to the Marlins, who have, by my count, at least 5 guys, plus a backup catcher, Liam Hicks, plus some relievers. There might be something like 8 rookies on this Marlins roster, and not because they're all superstars in waiting. Let's take the pitcher first. Connor Gillespie is in the Marlins rotation. Do we need to remember his name at all? I mean, it's a nice home park, or can I already forget him?
Yeah, we can forget him. The loss of Brian Weathers, the injury to Cabrera. We know now over the years that there have been exciting pitchers in Miami, but the reality is they just can never get the full rotation together and go. Gillespie is going to be just a stopgap guy. And yes, he may actually stick because who knows, maybe there's more injuries to come. But I think from a value perspective, it's just not worth it in 2025.
All right, so we'll throw Gillespie in the forget bucket. Now we've got 4 hitters here. None of whom are Agustin Ramirez. Would be probably excited for him once he eventually shows up as a catcher who can steal some bases and hit as well. But he's not there right away. Instead, we've got Griffin Conine, Graham Pauley, Eric Wagaman, and Javier Sanoja. I am pretty prepared to forget all of those guys. Are there any of them who even rise to the level of keep this guy on your watch list?
I hate to say this, and I think this is an emotional comment, but Conine is interesting. And it's interesting because he's performed better just in the 30 games last year at the major league level than he really did throughout his entire minor league career. He actually mimicked his 268 at AAA last year at the major league level, which was his best average dating all the way back to his time at Duke. Not a good average in college. His best season at Duke when he was drafted was 286 in full season play. So average has always been the problem, but power has been there. And I like to often say, you know, prospect growth, and this is industry standard, is not linear, right? We like to say that. We could be seeing a late career breakout, even though the kid's only 26, 27. I just think back to Brent Rooker and what Rooker did. I'm not going to say that Conine's Rooker, but if you're looking for a guy that may provide you power, might hit over 250, keep an eye on him, because I think a lot of people are sleeping on him, and that's harder to find, that impact power, I think, than speed this season.
All right, so Griffin Conine, one interesting name from among this collection of Marlins. Let's go to the Mets. Luis Angel Acuna has made the Mets, but looks like probably in a bench or short side platoon role. Probably going to take the short side of the platoon with Brett Beatty at second base. Acuna, somebody who really struggled in the minors last year and then was promoted and looked great in a very tiny sample. I don't totally know what to do with that and wasn't targeting him in drafts this season. Should I be at least tracking him, though, I would imagine? I don't think any Acuna can be a forget.
Yeah, we're absolutely tracking. And I think when you're tracking both Acuna and you're tracking Batty here. Brett Beatty could have an incredible season. We could see a Mark Vientos type of turnaround here. If those of you remember Vientos, he was forgotten coming into 2024. And one of the worst at-bats, personally, I've ever seen in person in Milwaukee a couple of years ago. Overpowered, had no business being in the major leagues. He figured it out. And Beatty has a much higher pedigree, shown contact in the minor leagues, has shown the exit velocities. This spring was really impressive. I think it's absolutely important to remember what you said earlier. Who was he facing this spring training? That's going to have to play into the equation with Acuna. If Beatty wins this job outright the rest of the season, you know, he might even hold off Jeff McNeil. If not, if he stumbles, this could be a three-way kind of interesting collage of Acuna, Batty, and McNeil. And again, the Mets are looking to win. A lot of counting stats in this lineup, a lot of protection in this lineup. I think Acuna and Batty have big upside depending on who ultimately takes the most value out of that position.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on Luis Angel Acuna. Moving around the NL East, Phillies, they've got no rookies. Andrew Painter eventually in the second half, but certainly not on the opening day roster. So we'll move to the Nationals, who have one of the favorites for Rookie of the Year in Dylan Cruz, already on a team pretty much everywhere. So we don't really need to ask the question. That's the theme of today's show. But Dylan Cruz, just how excited are you for him? He's probably up there with Jason Dominguez as the most established, highest potential guy that we're going to talk about today. Is he going to hit the ground running and be a star this year, do you think?
No, I don't think so. And that hurts, because I was a massive Dylan Cruz supporter. I thought he was significantly better than Langford coming out of the 2024 draft. And I think I was wrong. We just haven't seen the exit velocities translate like we have with Langford. And the contact for Cruz too hasn't necessarily been there. Now, if he can make a jump, if he can start to really lean into some of the power that he had at LSU, we're talking about a star. But if the power doesn't come, we might be talking more of a Brian Reynolds with plus speed. And that's a great player for long term. But I do think there's going to be some struggles this year. It's a very young lineup in Washington, D.C. And I think they're going to develop together. But 2025, I'm definitely taking Dominguez over Cruz.
All right, we will move on to the NL Central now, where I think there might only literally be one relevant rookie on the opening day roster. That's crazy for a division this unimpressive, but maybe those two things are linked. Maybe better teams call up their good players right away. Maybe better teams have good players ready to call up right away too. The only particularly relevant rookie in the NL Central is Matt Shaw of the Cubs, whose jersey I just bought yesterday. Have I cursed him like I did with Christopher Morel last year? Do you think Matt Shaw is going to hit the ground running and should be added in all those shallower leagues where he may still be out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Shaw is my number one rookie in 2025.
Nice.
The only concern I have is the leg kick and timing. This has been something dating back to Maryland that he's had. It's been in his mechanical arsenal. It's worked well for him. He leans into his power. He's able to stay on that back leg. It's worked. Again, what happens when you see a higher end velocity? What happens when he goes up against 101 miles an hour in Paul Skeens, right? Like, does that leg kick and that mechanics throw off the timing? Only thing I'm watching this season. We see a lot of guys from year one to year two change some of those big mechanical, I'd say, flaws. And sometimes they don't. Still works for Justin Turner, who's literally his backup. So Matt Shaw for me is number one rookie. I think 2020 is pretty easy if those mechanics don't really throw him off. 260, 270, probably likely. I think the floor is 250. And that's just very, very hard to find. And then you add in the defensive versatility that he has across some platforms of second base, third base, even potentially shortstop. I've seen in some formats. A lot to like here. He is my middle infielder in as many leagues as I can get him.
All right, so go get Matt Shaw, the best rookie this year, potentially certainly the top rookie in the NL Central. The Pirates and Cardinals have none, and I'll give you the other three in the division who are all backup hitters: Gage Workman of the Cubs, Blake Dunn of the Rangers, Isaac Collins of the Brewers. I'm pretty sure these guys are all forget, and we're just going to move on to the NL West, but stop me if any of them even rises to the level of track.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. They are forget-ems for me as well.
All right, so we'll move to the NL West here, where the Diamondbacks don't have any relevant rookies. Neither do the Padres or the Giants, it looks like. But the Rockies, well, they've got one at the back of the rotation, and I think I'm going to make an executive decision and say Bradley Blaylock. He's a forget as well. I'm not even going to ask you the question. You're nodding. Okay, we're going to move on there. Don't need to worry about Bradley Blaylock, temporary sixth starter for the Rockies. Seth Halverson. Do we need to worry about him at all? Somebody who could get saves. I mean, I really don't ever want to put a Rockies closer into my lineup, but is Seth Halverson, is he one that I should add if I'm absolutely desperate for saves or track or anything?
Yes. And I think I may have just fallen in love with Halverson because of his Tennessee Volunteer track history there. But he showed in a short sample size last year to be efficient at the major league level. He has a plus arsenal, throws 100 miles an hour. If you can throw hard enough in Colorado where they can't hit the ball, problem solved. Now, it's Colorado, right? That's nice to say. We know any Colorado pitcher usually has a 4 ERA. If not, it's an elite season. And being a bad team in one of the hardest divisions in all of baseball, it's going to minimize save opportunities. But again, I think Seth Halverson has an opportunity to provide value in deeper leagues. I think from a ratio perspective, he should be good. Had a pretty bad spring, but again, what do we really take from spring? I think we will debate that for the eternity of time. I'm at least keeping an eye on Halverson because of that strikeout appeal.
All right. And then finally, we've got the Dodgers, who have one very relevant rookie. But let's start with the other guy, Ben Kasparias, because who wants to end the show with Ben Kasparias? Although he's not bad, is he? Ben Kasparias opening the year as a long reliever, not a non-prospect as far as I'm aware, and he could spend some time in the back of the Dodgers rotation. Is he at least a track, or should we forget about Ben Kasparias?
I'm going to forget just because the Dodgers rotation bullpen at all times it's ebbs and flows of, who's placed where and where's the opportunity. I do always like to remind people there's always a reliever that gets 8, 9, sometimes 10 wins, a guy that just puts up 80 innings with a great ERA. We saw it last year in Detroit. This could be the name. It happens to be a rookie. But for me, overall upside, again, I'm thinking, what am I spending on that individual roster spot? I would rather have that roster spot with higher upside. And I'm sure this will be a name that will float on the waiver wire most of the season. But heck, in a rotation that could have every single player injured at one point this year, there absolutely could be a timing when he is valuable.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think I want whoever is in the Dodgers rotation whenever they're there, including the final guy that we'll talk about today, Roki Sasaki. He's added everywhere, I'm sure. If you play in a 2-team league, maybe you can get Roki Sasaki, the superstar coming over from Japan. Not totally proven yet, but as elite of a pitching prospect as you're going to get, pretty much. So I guess the question I should actually ask you with Roki Sasaki is, should you be waiting until his first bad start and then sending out some trade offers? Or should you be maybe waiting until his first good start and then trying to trade him away? What's your opinion on Roki Sasaki for this year specifically?
I think the hype is at a great point right now. It's really hard to gauge that, right? Like, where's the hype? Do you want to buy? Do you want to sell? For me, love Roki, love everything he's doing for baseball on the Dodgers and in the Japanese series. I'm selling him currently because I'm just not sure what the innings are going to look like this season. They're going to be very careful with him. We saw that in the first start. A lot of variables in that first start, not stretched out, not a lot of spring opportunity, right? Strikeouts were shown. The splitter is one of the best pitches I've ever seen. But my max for him this season in innings limit is about 120. And if I can go out and get a Chris Sale, which I saw a deal made just a couple days ago, I'm going to take that. Still risk there. Chris Sale hasn't had the greatest track record, even though he won Cy Young last year with the staying healthy. But I at least hope for Sale that maybe there's 160 to 180 innings, maybe upside of even 200 if he doesn't get hurt. I'm going to take that in 2025 in redraft leagues over the excitement of Roki Sasaki and his baseball profile. So if you can offer it today, absolutely go do it. If you want to wait for his first great start, sure, might be the end of April. It might be the first time we get 6 innings out of him. They're going to really be careful with him. And then the last thing I'll say is, the last time I saw a pitcher that really impressed me with his stuff as much as Roki was actually his teammate, Dustin May. And Dustin May was always, when is the arm going to go? Because a human being should just not be able to do what he does. And Roki's splitter it's incredible. And my first thought is a human body should not be able to do that. So it scares me. And I'm just praying we get to see healthy seasons out of Roki and that he provides value to everybody.
All right, so we have covered every single rookie who's breaking camp in the big leagues, with the exception of maybe a couple backup catchers and middle relief types. We're pretty much out of time here, but Matt, how about in these last 2 minutes here, tell me some of the players you might consider stashing over some of the guys who were merely wait list track sort of guys today. A whole bunch of top prospects didn't make it. Are you going to go with a Roman Anthony, Caleb Durbin, Kobe Mayo, Bubba Chandler Simpson, a whole bunch of guys that people were interested in and were drafting who failed to make the team. So what's 2 or 3 names who you think deserve a stash?
Yeah, Rome's number 1, Roman Anthony. I think we're talking about one of the highest ceilings in the minor leagues. We're talking about a guy that hasn't even scratched the surface of who he's really going to be. There's an incredible video going on social of him hitting a ball with a metal bat. I don't even know if it landed within our county, let alone on this planet. Just an incredible talent. Playing time may be a concern. The Red Sox are in it to win it, like we said. I do think he's up at the latest by July. He's the number 1 prospect, I think, from a positional eligibility that you're going to want to roster him now, because he won't be there long if he's there. And then from a pitching perspective, Bubba Chandler has ace upside. Again, being a former prep arm, there is question marks on when he will fully develop, but I think Pittsburgh is committed to winning this season. We know they're a cheaper organization. Him, Thomas Harrington not being on the rotation to start the year, even though we've had the Jared Jones injury, kind of shows us that. So Chandler's a guy that I would definitely keep an eye on, worst case scenario, but if you have a roster spot, you could use it. I think Thomas Harrington comes up before Chandler, but Thomas Harrington being more of a control master, limiting damage, going deeper into games, wouldn't surprise me if Harrington's actually the better 2025 fantasy asset. Chandler will get you the strikeouts, though. So I think Anthony and Chandler, out of the guys we didn't talk about today, pitcher, batter. And then last one, you mentioned it, Augustin Ramirez. We're talking about a catcher that can potentially steal bases, provide power. That's a guy, if you are really desperate, your catcher position is not providing you value. When he gets called up, when that happens, he could be a guy that could really save your roto season.
All right, so hopefully that gives you a good number of names to go grab today, whether it's those stashes that Matt just mentioned or all the ads that we mentioned throughout the bulk of today's show. Thank you very much, Matt, for spending some of the final hours of spring training with me here today. I believe first pitch is in under an hour. Looking forward to finally sitting back and figuring out what all we got wrong this offseason. Thanks again, Matt, for your time. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for having me on. I'm on scoutthestatline.com. More Dynasty analysts there. We have the Dynasty Dingers podcast. Me and Doc Eisenhower do that once a week, where we dive into deep Dynasty prospects, a little more redraft talk this year and how those players are transitioning to the pro game. But it was a pleasure. And again, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, listeners. Thank you for everyone who hung out in the chat. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Todd and Clay going over 2 start pitchers here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax.